Good afternoon, I'm Shelley. I'm going to be sharing with you just a flavour really of some of the projects that we've been undertaking at Taylor & Francis in an effort to develop and encourage best practice. Full disclosure, about 1/3 of this presentation is about work I've done and the rest is about others that colleagues have done. So Andy and Madeline, I'd like to give them a big shout out. They're not here, but they also played a part in this research. So first thing to say is, whilst preparing for this presentation, my abstract was around the work that I've been doing working within the engineering disciplines, but I was planning to just discuss the small-scale experiments that my team had been running, but I unearthed a wide range of activities going on independently across the editorial department, and I was very encouraged to see so many colleagues engaging with this issue, and so that's why I've actually broadened it out to share just 3 of the main projects that I came across. I'll be telling you about the departmental survey that my colleague Andy Nichols put together and disseminated to our global editorial team in order to capture experiences and viewpoints. And I'll talk you through the research conducted by my colleague Madeline to diversify the editorial boards of her journals. And finally, I'll tell you about the experience of my team in efforts to increase the diversity of our editors-in-chief. So I'm afraid my presentation is big on pie charts, so I hope you're okay with that. So to begin, first pie chart. My colleague Andy is a managing editor on our physical sciences portfolio based in our Philadelphia office, and we are part of the same wider team. She and I are part of the PSE group. And recently we took time to step away from our busy days and focus on researching projects that we had personal interest in. Andy chose to look at diversity and inclusion and designed a survey for staff. So the survey was not done in any official capacity. Andy herself undertook to learn more about what others are currently doing within the wider department and identify what more could be done on a journal level. And you're getting a sneak peek here because Andy's results haven't been officially circulated internally yet. So this is quite fresh data. And so the survey looks at gender and racial diversity and was sent to all staff who directly manage journals. This is typically what we call managing editors, but some are assistants and some publishers also have titles. And the survey had 9 multiple choice questions and 6 optional free text. She had 57 respondents, which we've estimated to be around 75% of eligible staff, so it was a pretty good return rate. We want to say that we know that the survey wasn't perfect and doesn't include other aspects of diversity, such as LGBTQ inclusion and inclusion of those with disabilities, among others. And we are keen to do more of this in an official capacity. But we had a pretty nice mix of subject areas represented, and the number of journals managed varied a lot. There were some respondents who managed under 10 journals, some who managed over 30. I think some people want to discuss that when we get back. But we've decided not to tease out the data in that way, as it didn't much change the percentages and the results very much. So she hasn't done that here. But it's important to keep that in mind as we move forward. So the majority of respondents, turns out, do talk with their editors about diversity and inclusion, and generally editors receive these conversations positively. These stats are encouraging, although there is still a lot of room for growth and for keeping this consistent and keeping a consistent conversation about expectations. The open-ended responses of her survey revealed that the follow-through and reaction of editors depends on what field they're in and if they feel that their field is in and of itself diverse. Internally, there's absolutely no official guidance or targets around diversity, with staff really just using their own judgment. And speaking for my own wider team, which is over 400 journals globally, so I think it's relevant. This is a common discussion at our team meetings, though I can't say that's the case for every team, but we feel that an important first step is to encourage editorial teams to start talking more proactively with editors to be drivers of change, since those editors and us, in extension, are in positions of power and have influence over the diversity of our communities. So In terms of editorial boards are expected to be regionally diverse. That's been a common conversation for decades, probably driven by that need within the impact factor, I suspect. But there is work to be done to make sure enough men and women of colour are represented. The key findings is that 44% of respondents had 20% or less female editor-in-chiefs. 2/3 had less than 40% female editor-in-chiefs, and when it comes to people of colour, the results are frankly depressing. Essentially, 97% of journal managers report having 40% EICs of colour or less, and few or none of these are female. So, as an important caveat to this, we are aware that respondents with 2 to 10 journals are lumped in with respondents who manage 30 over 30. And so these percentages mean different things depending on the amount of journals one person is managing. But as I said, we did include them all together. So although the current picture does not look diverse, we were slightly heartened. An interesting takeaway from the survey is that just by asking the question of the staff, it really got people talking. It brought the subject to the forefront of people's minds, and people are now actively sharing ideas with one another. The managing editors have their own sort of portal conversation board, and I'm told that there's a lot of conversation happening in there now on this subject. And Andy thinks that the biggest lesson from her survey is that just ask the question. But we need to keep the conversation going year round and for years to come. Another interesting takeaway was that some people mentioned they were actually surprised by how diverse their editors actually were, which was also encouraging to hear, and it's not all bad. She said that, I think personally that her last point is interesting about staff wanting to learn more about how to promote diversity and inclusion. I think when you have a natural interest, it is sometimes hard to see why others don't share our passion for this, but it can be, I think, an intimidating or confusing landscape, and not everybody has time or inclination to self-educate. I regularly get asked questions on how to improve diversity by colleagues as if I'm some kind of expert, purely because I'm on the WIP panel that Fee told you about earlier. So I think opening up the conversation and starting to share best practice seems a good way to give colleagues both within and outside of Taylor and Francis a better understanding of the issues and how we might overcome them. So to that end, I am no expert, but I'll now share with you some detail on some discrete projects within the business. So Madeline, or Mads, is the managing editor for area studies at Taylor and Francis, and she was concerned to explore regional diversity in the subject area because in recent years there's been a significant debate about the representation of various world regions in publishing academic research, both within area studies and across many other disciplines. So she asked the question, how diverse are the editors and editorial boards of journals really? So in late 2017, she analysed the location of editor affiliation and the composition of the editorial boards at the top 10 Asian studies journals and the top 10 African studies journals in the JCR. And given their remit to maintain research integrity and academic standards, as well as identifying emerging and innovative areas of research, it is these academics who hold a not insignificant amount of power with regards to shaping the future of the field, and they have a key role to play in raising global voices. It is perhaps in this domain in particular that the publisher can play an active role, as they may be responsible for appointing the academic editor in the journals they own, and even when publishing on behalf of a partner, take on advisory role and oftentimes do play an active part in the recruitment process. So it's important to note that this information was gathered in the 2017 composition of editorial boards, which does not allow us to paint a picture of whether representation has improved over time. And we also limited this exercise to the editorial boards proper, so it did not include any colleagues in advisory roles. So in both Asian and African studies, the geographic location of editors is skewed very much towards the west, as you can see. Within Asian studies, of 27 editors working in the top 10 JCR ranked journals, only 10 are based in Asia. And within African studies, the picture is even less diverse. Of 42 editors working across the 10 journals, only 5 are based in Africa, and those were only based in South Africa and Ghana. So that whole rest of the continent is not represented at those high levels. The findings from our analysis of the editorial boards do not suggest better representation at this level, and of course this may be because really one feeds the other, in the sense that editors are typically selected from the ranks of the board. Essentially, to improve the representation of the editor or the editor-in-chief level, we probably need to improve the representation across editorial boards. Of a total of 233 editorial members across the African journals, only 46 are affiliated with African institutions. And if we drill down into the African data some more, we find that 23 of 46 African editorial board members are based in South Africa, with much smaller numbers representing other African nations. Asian studies fares slightly better on editors, although 84 representatives is only just about over 30% representation. And a familiar picture now, we can also see that Asian representation consists, for the most part, of board members based in China and Hong Kong, with very small numbers from other countries. Okay. So what are we doing to redress the imbalances that have prevailed to date? Well, the Area Studies team is now developing and actively engaging in initiatives with our academic editors to improve the geographic diversity of the editorial boards. One example comes from Critical African Studies, which is currently homed at the University of Edinburgh. The journal has a commitment to international academic exchange and decolonising the academy, and appreciates that a vital part of it is having editors from the region. In 2017, they launched a targeted call for editors based in Africa, with 2 new editors subsequently being appointed, one based in the University of Cape Town and the other at Midland State University in Zimbabwe. The new editorial structure has been working very well, and the conversations have now progressed further. The journal now aims to have Africa-based authors included in every issue, general or special, and the latest discussion concerns moving the journal's base from Edinburgh to the University of Cape Town. Another example of working to diversify the editorial boards is the review of African political economy. The journal's editorial working group works to engage scholars in journal decision-making from the earliest stage of their career, and each year appoints several affiliates to the EWG, particularly encouraging early career researchers from Africa to apply. Although the affiliate programme is still in its early years, a number of these scholars have subsequently been appointed to the board. So we've been grappling with these issues for many years, both within academia and the publishing industry, and it is clear that there is no one catch-all solution for increasing diversity amongst editors and editorial boards. But here are some of Madeleine's suggestions. Overall, she says that if scholars are able to access and engage with research from the start of their careers, they will be more familiar with journals, and we would hope more likely to join our editorial boards. And she's suggesting collaborate in questioning the status quo, key figure detection and cultivation, and the various tools that Publishers has to help our editorial boards to reach wider networks. So believing that change starts at the top, in 2017, some colleagues conducted internal analysis on the gender diversity of our editors and by subject area. The picture was mixed, with some subjects like allied and public health being over 54% female, through to engineering and computer science having just 13% female editors. As publisher of the UK ECT team, I felt it was worth exploring ways that we could contribute to change, and I was delighted to easily get the support of both my team and my director to actively look at this. We first looked at our current practices, so we looked back at 2016, which was quite difficult because we hadn't planned to do this, so we had to go through emails and things and trawl through all of that. But we first we're considering, so we looked at our current practices, considering diversity from both an international and gendered perspective. Our analysis showed that during 2016, we recruited new editors for 12 journals across a portfolio of 90. And looking at the percentage of female and male applicants, the number of female applicants was worryingly low, but there was consistency of progression through the process. So 8% applied, 8% got an interview, 8% appointed. So at least in terms of gender, we didn't feel that we had an internal bias. However, the clear reliance on using the existing editors' networks to find new editors was a concern, as that was the main way that people were finding their editors, and it is the quickest and easiest method, but it isn't likely to lead to a diversity of voices in the journal leadership. In addition, whilst there was a range of geographic locations of applicants, these were heavily skewed towards US and UK, and in recruiting we also appear to have a strong bias towards recruiting UK-based editors, as these are heavily favoured for interview, and with 100% of those interviewed being appointed. So of all editor appointments by my team in 2016, 66% were based in the UK. And it is worth reminding you that this is a UK-based team that has undergone unconscious bias training. So it's very depressing. And to be clear, by interview, I'm referring to the process of structured interview with consistent scoring applied, as well as informal chats on the phone or just an email agreeing with the editor's suggestion. So there was no actual standardization of approach in terms of hiring in that way. And we found the data eye-opening, to be honest. It made it clear to us that we could do more to encourage a wider diversity of applicants and mitigate against bias in the recruitment process. So we decided on a small-scale experiment across 3 journals within the team and worked with colleagues in marketing and our journal development department to facilitate that process. So these are the things that we looked at. We took a look at our existing advert templates. For brevity, basically the key considerations were language that might be off-putting to women, and that generally speaking, women tend to be overworked as they have more domestic responsibilities than their male counterparts, so may not be keen to take on even more responsibility that they might see within an editor role. So we therefore aim to emphasise within the job advert the support that TNF provides to our editors. It also emphasised the benefits of being an editor, and the advert actively encouraged co-editor applications. So in addition, we tried to quantify the work involved where possible. This one was a bit controversial, but we usually did it in terms of the time the current editor was spending on the journal. The adverts were consciously promoted to a wide network of people, including social media, email lists, listservs, journal networks, such as Scholar One manuscripts. This was pre-GDPR, and through the current board networks. And we blinded the applications for the trial by having applications sent to someone not within my editorial team. And they would remove identifying information such as name and affiliation, and they would send that to the hiring panel for consideration. So the panel consisted of the editorial team, so typically myself or my director and the managing editor, possibly an assistant. Though now, actually, since this small-scale experiment, we still have the panel, but we also now try to ensure that we have an independent academic on that panel as well, so it's not just Taylor and Francis staff. And we chose questions from a standard library of editor questions that already existed, and we agreed a mark scheme prior to the interview. So we agreed how they would be assessed, and all of the interviews were conducted via Skype. So the results. So first to say that we're aware that our sample is very small and not statistically significant, but with that caveat, these are the results. So we didn't see an increase in the number of applications, although these do tend to vary quite a lot amongst journals, and these were all relatively niche journals. A quarter of applicants were female, which is a marked improvement on the 8% we previously achieved on the wider list. Interestingly, in terms of the gender split of those that were invited to interview, following the blind selection, the split was 50-50 between men and women. We had applications from 8 countries, with there being a much more even distribution of countries, although they are still decidedly Western in nature. And of these applicants, People from Australia, Belgium, UK, US, Italy, and the Netherlands were invited to interview, but no applicants from India or Greece were invited. Of those interviewed, the results for the successful applications were as followed. Across the 3 journals, 5 editors were appointed, with 2 of the journals having co-editors, and one of these co-editors was female, which means that 20% of appointees were female. So not huge, but still better than 8 or none. The geographical split was much more even, and overall I think we were confident that our process was robust and fair, but personally, it was slightly disheartening to put a lot of effort into one particular journal to try and change things, only to hire a middle-aged white guy based in the UK. Even though actually that guy is a fantastic editor and has done wonders for the journal in the short time that he's worked on it, it still wasn't really my goal. But we did learn a lot through doing this. So just to let you know about the lessons that we learned. We now have a much more robust recruiting process that's no longer based on a tap on the shoulder, and this is becoming standard practice throughout Taylor and Francis. In addition, we are actively looking to invite new voices by implementing more frequent editor rotations, so that job for life, that someone there for 20, 25 years managing the journal. But in honesty, that has been a difficult conversation with some boards. And the conversation with editors that we're having, so my team now makes diversity a key aspect of the interview questions and the onboarding process for editors, including succession planning for a diverse support, giving women and geographically diverse board members more involvement in the journal as editorial board members. And some team members have started reporting on diversity metrics to their boards, but this isn't yet standard practice. But there were quite a lot of things that are still frustrating. So although we blinded the applicants in this trial, we haven't found it to be practical to do so for every process at the moment. We've marginally improved gender diversity, but international applicants aren't getting through, that's clear. And usually this was due to experience in terms of the applicants, but internally we've suggested looking at the language and the structure of the questions that we're asking as well, and adapt those for people whose first language isn't English. I noticed in these interviews quite often you have to repeat yourself more to those people whose language isn't English first. That has an effect on their confidence as they go through the interview. So I think that's definitely an area to be looked at. We've recommended that we set up some kind of mentoring scheme, either from both with our editors, but also activities that we do for ourselves. This is quite tricky because mentoring takes time and no one has any, but something that is in short supply, obviously, but I'm still keen that be something that we look at. And certainly my most recent appointments, I've been telling editors that they should really be looking to delegate more to their board members and really skill them up. We found that the lack of routine data collection made this project time-consuming. We still don't collect it anywhere. Our third parties don't collect it. Scholar One doesn't collect any data. We don't collect any data. It would be nice to set targets, but it's kind of hard to set those targets if we're not able to measure effectively. And there are flaws in our analysis because assignment of gender is subjective, and it's kind of easy to do it based on geographies, but obviously not race and not gender. It's a total minefield that some staff are actually just walking into. And in these cases, we've assigned gender based on name and appearance, and we didn't even consider manually assigning race and wouldn't. But obviously that's not a very woke methodology, but it's all we have. So you either do nothing or you do something, and we just started here doing something. And apart from editor recruitment, our boards are independent. So this means that we can only advise to best practice and what we would like to see, but some editors are highly engaged in that and some want to but don't know where to start. And there aren't many at least who don't see it as a problem they want to solve. So that's just been our experience. I would say that, we started off with 13% female editors-in-chief within engineering and computer science. We now have, a year later, 14%. So we're not, it's not an amazing change, but I think hopefully over time with best practice and looking at the things that are working and the things that aren't working so well, we'll start to shift that needle a bit more. It would be nice to have a bit more structural support in the company for these initiatives, which we don't have, but I was still really pleased to see so many people internally are actually taking it upon themselves to try and find ways to make these changes. So yes, that's my presentation. Thank you.